Her words cut deeper than any blade. My own mother's voice rang through the living room. We're not your ATM anymore. She folded her arms, her face smug, as if I was nothing but a burden. I stood there in silence, but inside me something shifted. And just minutes later, everything in that house changed forever. Nandi stood nervously in the living room, clutching the bill in her hand. It wasn't much, just a small amount that would help her cover what she needed to keep her studies on track. Her heart pounded as she looked at her parents, hoping for just a little understanding. Mama, Baba, I only need this one thing. Please, she said softly, her voice carrying both humility and desperation. But instead of warmth, the air cracked with harshness. Her mother, Shipiso, folded her arms and let out a laugh that pierced through Nandi like glass. We are not your ATM, Nandi. Stop leeching off us, she snapped, her words echoing through the room like thunder. The younger cousins, who had been playing nearby, froze. Their giggles died, their little eyes wide as they stared. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering under their breath. Nandi felt her cheeks burn with shame as though every gaze was a dagger. She opened her mouth to explain, to remind them how much she'd sacrificed already, but the words got stuck in her throat. Her father, Obaking, leaned back in his chair with a smug look, nodding as if agreeing with every cruel syllable her mother had spoken. The silence that followed was heavier than the insult itself. Even the music in the background seemed distant now, drowned by the humiliation that wrapped itself around Nandi's chest. She forced a weak smile, pretending the words didn't break her, pretending she wasn't standing there with her dignity crumbling piece by piece. But inside, her heart screamed. She thought about all the times she had stayed awake at night, studying under a dim light, dreaming of making her parents proud. Now, in front of her entire family, she was reduced to nothing but a leech. Her cousins glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Some relatives lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet hers, while others shook their heads with judgment, as if Nandi had asked for the world instead of just a little help. That room, once filled with laughter and chatter, turned into a stage where her spirit was torn apart. And in that moment, Nandi realized something deep. This wasn't just about money. It was about worth, and her parents had just told her she had none. Nandi rushed into her room and shut the door quietly, pressing her back against it as though she could block out the voices still echoing from the living room. Her hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled bill, the same paper that had caused her humiliation. She sank onto the edge of her bed, burying her face in her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, hot and heavy, as if years of hidden pain were finally breaking loose. She tried to muffle her sobs so no one outside could hear, but the weight of her rejection pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. In the silence of her room, memories rushed back like waves. She saw herself younger, staying up late after school, working part-time shifts at the local store just to help buy groceries when her parents struggled. She remembered the times she skipped outings with her friends so her little brother could have new shoes for school. Every small sacrifice she made, she did it with love, believing that family came first. She thought her parents noticed, that they appreciated her. But tonight proved she had been wrong. Her pillow soaked with tears as her mind replayed her mother's cruel words. We are not your ATM. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way everyone laughed, the way her father nodded as if her humiliation was entertainment. The same people she had once protected and supported now treated her, as if she was nothing but burden. Her heart ached with betrayal, but underneath the pain was a quiet rage. She sat up slowly, her face wet and swollen, and stared at the small photo frame on her desk. It was a picture of her with her siblings, smiling brightly on a school day. She remembered how proud she had been to provide for them, to make sure they never felt the emptiness she carried. But now, the very family she thought she was holding together had pushed her away. For the first time, Nandi whispered to herself, maybe I don't belong here anymore. The words scared her, but deep down, she knew they were true. That night, rejection didn't just break her, it planted a seed. A seed that would one day grow into the strength to stand on her own and in the living room. The laughter of Obaking and Shipiso rang louder than the music that had been playing earlier. Shipiso leaned back in her chair, her arms folded, a satisfied smirk plastered on her face, as if she had just won a battle. Finally, she said proudly, her voice carrying across the room. She'll learn the hard way. Life isn't about handouts. Baking chuckled in agreement, raising his glass as though this was a toast to their daughter's downfall. Yes, he added, we've been too soft on her. This is the only way she'll grow. Their words sliced through the atmosphere, leaving a heaviness that everyone could feel but no one dared to challenge. Relatives sat awkwardly around the room, glancing at one another, their whispers creeping like shadows. Some nodded quietly, murmuring that maybe Nandi did need to toughen up, that perhaps her parents were right. But others looked uneasy, shifting in their seats, pity flashing in their eyes for the young woman who had just been humiliated in front of them all. One aunt whispered under her breath, "That girl has always helped her siblings. How could they say such things?" Yet even she lowered her eyes quickly, afraid of drawing Chipiso's sharp tongue. The cousins who had witnessed it all sat in silence, some snickering behind their hands, too young to understand the gravity of the cruelty they had just seen. To them it was entertainment, just another story to repeat later. Meanwhile, Obaking and Chipiso basked in their own pride, their voices rising as they bragged about teaching lessons and building strength. They didn't notice the discomfort in the room. Or maybe they did, but their pride was too blinding for them to care. Every sentence they spoke seemed to erase Nandi's sacrifices. Every night she stayed awake working, every meal she skipped so others could eat, every quiet act of love she offered. In that moment, her parents were rewriting her story, painting her not as a giver but as a burden. And they laughed about it, proud of their cruelty, while Nandi sat alone upstairs with her broken heart. The living room buzzed with whispers and fake smiles, but beneath it all was a silence, an unspoken awareness that something irreversible had just happened. Pride had turned parents into strangers, and their daughter into a lesson they thought they were teaching, not realizing she was already learning something far greater. Nandi sat on the edge of her small bed, her face buried in her hands. Her body shook from silent sobs, but her eyes were dry now. She had cried until there were no tears left. The voices from downstairs still echoed faintly in her mind. Her mother's sharp words, her father's cold agreement, the snickers of her cousins. Each memory burned like fire in her chest. For a moment she felt as if she had nothing left, like a shell of the girl who used to give everything for her family. But then something shifted inside her, small at first, like a spark in the darkness. She wiped her cheeks slowly, her trembling hands turning into fists. She stood up and looked at herself in the cracked mirror by the wall. Her eyes were swollen, but there was something new in them, something steady, unshakable. She whispered to herself, her voice low but clear, "No more. If they see me as a burden, then I'll rise where they can never reach." The words tasted strange on her tongue, but also powerful. She repeated them again, louder this time, as if trying to convince not just herself but the universe too. All the memories of sacrifices came flooding back. Every time she stayed late at work to pay for her siblings' school trips. Every time she skipped buying clothes to buy groceries for the family. She had given so much, and yet they had chosen to humiliate her. That thought no longer broke her, it hardened her. She realized she could never rely on them again, and in that realization there was freedom. She began to move around the room with purpose now, her tears drying into determination. She folded her few clothes neatly into a small bag and took out her notebook, scribbling ideas, plans, goals, anything that could take her mind from pain to progress. The night outside was quiet, but inside her, a storm of resolve was building. For the first time, she felt the weight of her life shift back into her own hands. She wasn't going to beg or explain or prove her worth anymore. She was going to build it. And as she lay back down, staring at the ceiling, she whispered one last time, "This ends tonight. My rise starts now." Nandi's days began before the sun rose and ended long after midnight. With barely any money in her pocket, she cut her life down to the smallest, hardest pieces. Breakfast was often just a cup of water, lunch sometimes skipped, and dinner nothing more than a slice of bread or instant noodles. Her stomach growled, but she pushed through, convincing herself that hunger was temporary, that her pain had to be fuel for something greater. She took on every side job she could find. In the mornings, she scrubbed floors in office buildings, the smell of bleach clinging to her clothes. In the afternoons, she rushed to tutor younger students, explaining math equations, while fighting off her own exhaustion. And when the city grew quiet at night, she delivered groceries on foot, walking miles with heavy bags just to earn a few coins. Every step was tiring. Every hour felt endless, but she refused to stop. Her friends had long stopped inviting her out. They didn't understand why she vanished into the shadows of work, why she looked thinner each time they saw her. But Nandi didn't bother explaining. She knew no one could fight this battle for her. She walked alone, carrying the weight of her own survival, one shift at a time. At school, she studied with fierce focus. While others laughed in the cafeteria, she sat in a quiet corner, scribbling notes, whispering formulas to herself. Some nights, her body gave in, and she fell asleep over her textbooks, her cheek pressed against highlighted pages. She would wake up with sore eyes, but she never allowed herself to quit. She told herself over and over, "This struggle will not break me. It will build me." Neighbors whispered about her thin frame, about how she always looked tired, about how she worked too much. But they didn't see the fire burning behind her silence. Every skipped meal, every aching step, every sleepless night, it was shaping her into someone stronger than even she realized. And though her body was weary, her spirit was hardening like steel. Quietly, in the shadows of her struggle, Nandi was building the kind of strength that no humiliation could ever destroy. The library had become Nandi's second home. It was quiet, safe, and filled with the kind of hope she could not find anywhere else. She sat at her usual corner desk, her notebook filled with messy scribbles, her laptop glowing weakly with borrowed internet. That night, her eyes were heavy, her body aching from a long day of work, but she kept going. She whispered to herself as she typed, refusing to let the fatigue win. Across the room, a man had been watching her for some time. He wasn't staring out of judgment. There was something about her determination that caught his attention. His name was Tumalo, a well-known entrepreneur in the city. People respected him for the businesses he had built. But what impressed him the most tonight was the young woman hunched over her books, refusing to quit. When Nandi got up to stretch, he approached her with a kind smile. "You work harder than anyone I've seen in this place," he said softly. Nandi blinked, unsure if he was mocking her or being genuine. But there was warmth in his voice, and for the first time in weeks she felt truly seen. She tried to brush it off, saying she was just studying like everyone else. But Tumalo shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "Others study because they have to. You study because you're fighting for something. That's different." His words pierced through her guarded heart, and she felt her throat tighten. As they spoke, Nandi shared a little of her story. The rejection, the struggles, the hunger she endured just to stay afloat. Tumalo listened carefully, not with pity, but with deep respect. When she finished, he leaned closer and said words that would stay with her forever. "Your story is bigger than their limits. Don't let their small vision trap you." He handed her a card and told her about a startup program he was connected to, a place where people like her could learn and grow. "You have the hunger most people don't," he said. "That's your power." Nandi held that card like it was gold. For the first time, someone believed in her not as a burden, but as a seed waiting to grow. That night, she left the library with tired feet, but a new kind of hope burning inside her. Nandi's nights turned into a battlefield of glowing screens, half-empty mugs of cheap coffee, and endless tutorials she replayed until the lessons stuck in her mind like second nature. She wasn't just learning. She was fighting, pushing herself past exhaustion because deep down, she knew this was her ticket out. While others slept peacefully, she stayed up designing, testing, failing, and trying again. Every click, every late-night sketch, every draft she scrapped brought her closer to mastering digital design and the world of online business. At first, the results were small. Her first client paid her just a few dollars for a logo. But when she received that payment notification, her hands shook. It wasn't about the money, it was about proof. Proof that her skills had value. Proof that her nights of struggle weren't in vain. She took screenshots, not to boast, but to remind herself that this was the beginning of something bigger. Word spread slowly. A client recommended her to another, and then another. Emails started coming in from people across the world, asking her to design websites, create brand visuals, or consult on projects. The girl who once had to beg for a small bill now had strangers paying her for her talent. Her old life of being dismissed and mocked felt like a shadow she was slowly stepping out of. With her first few steady clients, Nandi saved every cent she could. She refused to waste a single coin. Remembering the hunger pangs, the skipped meals, the humiliation. Instead of treating herself, she reinvested into better tools, faster internet, and small online courses to sharpen her craft. She built herself like she was building an empire, one block at a time. And with every milestone, her first $100, her first international client, her first glowing review, her confidence grew. No one clapped for her in those moments, but she clapped for herself. She learned to celebrate her victories in silence, knowing one day the noise of her success would echo louder than the whispers of her doubters. Each small win became more than money. It became fuel, a stepping stone, a reminder that her parents' rejection wasn't the end of her story. It was the spark that lit the fire. Nandi wasn't just surviving anymore, she was rising. Months had passed, and the house that once rang with Obaking and Shapiso's proud laughter now echoed with arguments and silence. Their business, once the pride of the neighborhood, began to crumble under poor decisions and reckless spending. Debts piled high like bricks on their shoulders, and creditors came knocking at odd hours, demanding payments they could no longer make. The expensive car they once flaunted sat in the driveway, broken down, its maintenance too costly to fix. The same relatives who once praised them now whispered about their downfall behind their backs, shaking their heads at how quickly fortunes can change. Shapiso, who had once called her daughter a burden, now sat late into the night calculating bills she couldn't pay. Her smug smile had disappeared, replaced with lines of worry etched deep into her face. Obaking, too proud to admit his mistakes, walked around pretending all was well, but inside he was restless. Every time his phone rang, fear gripped him, worried it was yet another debt collector. It was during one of these heavy evenings that a relative, trying to lighten the tension, casually mentioned Nandi's name. They spoke about her success in hushed tones, about how she was building a name for herself, about how her work had reached clients far beyond their city. At first, Obaking brushed it off, his pride refusing to believe his once helpless daughter could have achieved anything without them. But as the whispers grew louder and more consistent, curiosity began to chip away at his denial. Shapiso, unable to hide her unease, began asking quiet questions. Is it true she's working with companies overseas? Is it true she moved into a better place? Each answer felt like a thorn, pricking at the memory of how they had cast her aside. The woman they had once mocked as a leech was now being spoken of with respect by the same family who had witnessed her humiliation. For the first time, regret crept into their hearts. They remembered the night they told her she was on her own, laughing with pride as they did it. Now the same decision haunted them. Pride still kept them from reaching out. But late at night, when the house grew too quiet, both Obaking and Shapiso lay awake with the same thought. What if the daughter they rejected had now risen higher than they ever imagined? The next family gathering was meant to be another moment for Obaking and Shapiso to show off, but this time their confidence was shaky. The living room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but beneath it all was tension. Everyone had heard the whispers. Nandi's name was spreading like wildfire. Some relatives were eager to see if she would show up. Others waited with curiosity to witness how her parents would handle her presence if she did. Shapiso, clinging to the remnants of her pride, tried to lighten the air with a mocking laugh. Nandi is probably too busy chasing dreams that don't pay. Let's hope she finally learned the value of responsibility. Some chuckled politely, but most avoided her eyes, already sensing her words carried no weight anymore. And then the room shifted. The doors opened, and in walked Nandi. She was unrecognizable to some, dressed in elegance, her presence commanding respect without her saying a word. Heads turned, conversation stopped mid-sentence, and silence spread across the room like a wave. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her were two well-dressed professionals, influential clients she now worked with, their respect for her clear in how they introduced her as a rising star in the business world. Obaking froze, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. Shapiso's smirk faded instantly, her words hanging in the air, exposed as hollow. The same relatives who once pitted Nandi now leaned forward with admiration, eager to hear her speak. Nandi smiled warmly at everyone, her tone calm but firm. She spoke not with bitterness but with quiet power. I remember the night I was told I was nothing but a burden. I was told to stand on my own, and I did. Today I stand here not as someone who needs, but as someone who creates. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on her parents. My business now earns more in a month than I was ever given in that house. Gasps filled the air. Some relatives exchanged shocked glances, others clapped quietly, and a few nodded in approval. Shapiso lowered her eyes, her face burning with shame, while Obaking looked as if the weight of his pride was finally too heavy to carry. Nandi didn't gloat, she didn't need to. Her presence alone said everything. The daughter they once humiliated now stood taller than they could ever imagine. The room was still tense, every eye locked on Nandi as she stood in the center, her calm voice cutting through the silence. Obaking shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Shapiso fidgeted with her bracelet, her once confident expression now a mask of regret. For the first time, the power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Nandi took a deep breath, her gaze steady. I will never forget the night you told me you are not my ATM. You were right, she said, her tone soft but carrying enough weight to press down on the entire room. I didn't need one. I became my own bank. Her words fell like thunder, not loud but impossible to ignore, echoing with a truth that could not be denied. For a moment, silence reigned. Then it happened. The sound of clapping, slow at first, then growing louder as relatives rose to their feet. Applause filled the space, a wave of support that wrapped around Nandi, drowning out the shame of her parents' past actions. Some relatives had tears in their eyes, others nodded with pride, whispering to each other about how far she had come. Obaking sat frozen, his face pale, staring at the daughter he once dismissed. The arrogance that had once fueled him was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Shapiso's shoulders slumped, her cheeks burning red as she avoided everyone's eyes. The applause wasn't for them. It never would be again. Nandi, however, didn't linger on their downfall. She didn't need to. She stood with dignity, not triumphing over her parents' humiliation, but celebrating her own strength. Her journey wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience. She smiled gently, her presence glowing with confidence and peace, a living proof of what determination can build even in the face of betrayal. As the clapping softened, the closing words carried through like a narrator sealing the story. They thought rejection would break her, but it only built the empire they could never own. The relatives looked at Nandi with admiration, some whispering that they had just witnessed a transformation, others already inspired to believe in themselves. And as Nandi walked away from that gathering, her steps were steady, her heart free. She had no chains of bitterness, only the wings of her own victory. She didn't just rise, she soared. Fire. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll. Hit red heart, drop a comment with Rise if you believe in turning pain into power, and share this with someone who needs hope today. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive. Raising Hand Sparkles.